So yesterday was a day of protests in high schools all across America. So much celebrating of the First Amendment. And whether they were remembering and honoring the victims or advocating for further gun restrictions, kids are asking adults to do something. So here I go. I'm going to weigh in on the situation and present what I see as the problems and offer my idea of what could be done in the area of solutions. It all started with my daughter making me wholeheartedly laugh, honestly. She informed me that her middle school would be participating in the walkouts. Now, as a good father, I asked her what that would entail. She told me the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders would assemble in the cafeteria for 17 minutes of silence, 1 minute for every victim of the Florida shooting. Now, of course, that is not the funny part. This is. Picture that. Hundreds of middle schoolers silent for 17 minutes in a row. My wife brought up a good point. It seemed as though the school was being less than transparent with my daughter. If this was being touted as simply a way of remembering the fallen, as the school and some media personalities claim, why did it directly coincide with the 17 minutes other schools and groups were using to advocate for stricter gun regulation? Now, we'll just have to see how it ends up being reported, but it's my take. So this 17 minutes now has come and gone, and the kids feel as though they took part in history, and if history is any indicator, nothing will come of it. So here seems a good place to insert my solution. I will start by saying I do not intend to insult or attack any teachers or other educational professionals out there. I respect you tremendously and am very aware of the demands that are placed on you. I ask only for your open mind and patience as I present my information. I welcome any comments you wish to give. As far as I can tell, the only way to truly stop school shootings from happening is to shut down the schools. I know that's controversial. I also assume that it's not even going to be on the table. It did get me thinking, though. So let me explain this. Number one, our current education model is ineffective. We currently rank 17th in the world. The factory model system we currently use is centuries old. Although constant innovation has been implemented, the paradigm and structure simply do not allow for the evolution of education to keep pace with the evolution of our current world. And it is also far too political, and those interests are extremely strong. You think the NRA is bad. So the resistance to real change has been a problem in Washington. These school systems should be controlled locally. Some more facts. The dropout rates are 25%. That puts us 22 out of 27 in developed countries. There's 2,000 schools that graduate less than 60% of their students, and 1 in 6 American students attend one of those dropout factories. Now, obviously, a lot of factories contribute. I study the Detroit system to help better understand school choice when it comes to public versus charter schools. There was a very strong correlation to indicate that student outcomes were most impacted by socioeconomic reasons. Single-parent households and low incomes were the biggest contributors. The data reflected that pumping more money into failing schools had little or no effect on those outcomes, especially when it came to in-school violence, test scores, and dropout rates. Now, of those kids that do graduate, a very limited number exit that system with any marketable skills. Now, of the students that go on to post-secondary, most will spend a good part of their first year doing remediation on basic skills in order to be at a college level, according to college professors I've had the opportunity to speak with, as well as articles that are available. You and I know there is an underlying issue if we need to medicate ourselves in order to simply cope with and function in life for any extended period of time. Why then are we so open to the idea of drugging our children in order to cope with and function in schools? Perhaps it is not that our children, especially the boys, have a problem. Perhaps the problem is the institutions, systems, and organizations into which they're forced. In an effort to help our children fit into non-child-shaped holes, we shave off their corners and grease them up with prescription meth or a whole cocktail of psychoactive drugs. By the way, are you aware that the number one characteristic of mass shooters is the use of psychoactive prescription medication? Basically, there is a diminishing return on money spent on education. What are we spending all that money on then? Number 2, the current model is inefficient. In spite of outspending any other country, the facts remain the facts. We rank low, especially in developed nations. As I said, this is not an attack on teachers. Quite the opposite, in fact. Let me explain. I had the pleasure of serving 4 years on a school board. I got a backstage pass to see the nitty-gritty of a teacher's world, especially in regard to the dedication and commitment necessary to do your job. I respect you tremendously. I realize your day is not 8 to 3. Now, outside of your classroom hours, there's grading papers, updating the portal, communication with parents, staff meetings, many of which are mandatory, and lesson prep. Now, guaranteed, I'm forgetting some. My point is that whatever time you get off in the summer only begins to even out the field compared to someone with a regular 40-hour-a-week job, if those exist. Unless you take into account the professional development seminars you attend between June and August. You are highly educated professionals who deal with our children on a day-to-day basis. I know my own wonderful children have days that are not so wonderful. I do not envy your job. I would not want it. Not because I think myself incapable, but because of the system that you work in. This may come as a shock, being that I am not on the inside of your realm, and you probably don't hear this from other people, but I believe you to be underpaid. Although I am hoping this helps you to persuade you in my argument, I know you could skeptically look at that as pandering, so let me explain. From what I know, teacher pay is more heavily weighted on time in versus a pure meritocracy. Without getting into the weeds, tenure is the goal. Outside of frustrations due to limitations that stem from class sizes and budgets, your ability to truly do your best work is constrained by rules around things like approved curriculum, teaching for the test, etc. Now, if an educator does go above and beyond, the mechanism that plugs into the basic human need of acknowledgement is limited, at best, in the world of public education. It is a thankless job on the whole. I've read articles that looked into people entering the field. When weighing the price of acquiring a teaching degree and associated costs against compensation, they have a difficult time justifying the two. People who might otherwise be great educators choose other options. That's just more proof that you are underpaid in spite of your passion. Those who do enter the field, regardless of their efforts, have very little control concerning being adequately compensated. I'll lay out the process as I see it, compared to the majority of professions that are out there. Now, of course, unions have some effect on this, but a major component is confined to the public education alone. When an increase in compensation is considered, normally a review process takes place, numbers are crunched, and if you make your case, your employer makes the decision to increase your wage. Now, inside the educational system, it's quite different. You may communicate with your principal, but generally the union has most of the say. Then a bond referendum is proposed when it's time. Generally, this corresponds to local elections. So your economic fate is now in the hands of people who do not know anything about you or your accomplishments. If they vote no, you are facing a reduction in your salary. That's, of course, when you account for inflation. A yes vote, although better, is still quite unique to the public education world. Now, generally, the referendum allots a certain percentage increase for a period of years. In recent referendums, the average salary increase was right around 2%. The average teacher salary in Minnesota ranges between just under $40,000 and to just over $60,000. Now, that's depending upon location. So let's say average is $50,000. Meaning your average salary increase equates to about $1,000. Most bond referendums are funded through an increase in property taxes. And average homes in Minnesota are right around $200,000. Our local referendum will result in a $130 increase for that average home. $130 is 30% of $1,000. Assuming most teachers, again, are living within the district in which they teach. So what that equates to is your salary increase as a teacher is funded 13% by you. Thank you for all your hard work and dedication. Now, it's no wonder that teachers are frustrated. The public school system is ineffective, inefficient, and does not adequately compensate those who choose the profession. We are compelled by penalty of law to send our children and pay for the privilege of said system. To top this off, as is evidenced by the tragedy which inspired the 17 minutes, these schools are unsafe. In my opinion, and based upon my observations, they will stay that way. A personal anecdote of an event from last Friday to illustrate my point. Last week, I had to go to my son's high school. We had just returned from a dentist appointment to reapply a composite to his fractured front tooth. I had to get a form from the office regarding his upcoming graduation. They had added new protocols since the shooting, and what I encountered was not heartening. 2 doors opposite each other require a person to be buzzed in. I entered through door number 19, which offers access to the back of the building and faces the annex where my son takes his automotive class. Well, after entering, you would proceed to show your identification to a staff member sitting in what looks like a ticket booth. That booth is located between those 2 doors. In the case of door 19, I actually crossed the main corridor, which runs down the center of the school's first floor. Could have bypassed the whole thing. Now, at the booth, which at this point did not seem to offer any protection to the attendant, you present your identification, which is swiped into the system. They give you a name tag, and then you go about your business. And when you're done, you stop by again to check out. So I stopped to have a conversation with the gentleman. We recognize each other. During our talk, I watched as he buzzed people in. Now, it's of course likely that he recognized them. That's why he let them in so easily. But I saw nothing to indicate that anyone who approached who he didn't recognize would be scrutinized any further before being admitted. Now, I inquired about whether any changes had been enacted. He answered, yes, but if a person comes through that door with an AR pointing to the door opposite the one I entered, I'm going to duck down behind the wall. I am no match for that, he explained. Now, I'm not sure what I could have said at that point that would make any difference. Perhaps I could have spoken my mind, but frankly, that day had already pushed me to my limit for reasons I won't go into here, and emotionally, there was just no way I was doing it. So how I felt about it actually didn't really even become apparent to me until the following day. Now, I understand his sentiment. Facing down a shooter with a rifle would be frightening. Just as frightening is the fact that all a potential shooter would have to do to enter the building is to push the button. Lastly, that the only person standing between that shooter and my son and your kids is a guy whose first reaction would be to hide. Like I said, I can't blame him. What's an average unarmed person going to do against an armed killer? Better question is, how is that a solution to the problem? So I return to my original statement that the only surefire way to stop school shootings, is to shut down the schools. Outside of that, perhaps making it more difficult to enter would be a good start. Making your first line of defense be a willing, capable, armed resource officer, which they have, stationed directly by the entrance would be a great next step. We could go so far as to follow the lead of Israel, and allow willing and trained staff to be armed as well, just in case that first line of defense is breached. Beyond that, our fates are left to law enforcement, regulation, personnel responsibility, and the grace of God to keep our children safe. Did I mention that most of the recent shooters have been in the FBI watch list? Whether this goes anywhere or not, I feel we are at a point where looking at opening ourselves to out-of-the-box options doesn't sound so bizarre. I propose that the money we spend on educating our kids, about $12,000 per student per year, follow that child. Now, as an average teacher making about $75,000 with salary and benefits package, could you consider being more open to a system in which you take on a smaller load of students than you currently instruct and make considerably more money? A private tutor making 6 figures with 10 students, for instance. Work with them doing online coursework with face-to-face instruction. Maybe cater to their individual needs. You'd be able to work on an individual, one-on-one basis if necessary. Now, perhaps operations similar to like Mathnasium would pop up offering education on a broad subject base rather than just simply mathematics. Maybe a trade-focused secondary education for students who aren't interested in four-year college. Specific education to give students marketable skills straight out of high school. What a concept. What kind of impact could we make to the socioeconomic problems if kids were empowered to make real money in careers upon graduation? I'm not even proposing dismantling the current system, although then you still have that pesky school shooter thing. Those who choose to stay within the system we currently have would really see no difference outside of a need to offer a competitive education. Now, taking into account that people are familiar with the current system we employ and change being difficult for most people, odds are that a good amount of parents would continue to go with the devil they know. Unfortunately, for the most part, we are held captive to the overpriced, underperforming, sometimes deadly system we currently enjoy. So there you have it. I hope to have spurred some thoughts, and of course I welcome the conversations I assume are probably brewing. Feel free to comment, rebut, or whatever you feel compelled. Please just try to keep it civil. Thank you.